welcome to another episode of Live the African Dream. I'm the host for today's podcast. My name is Iyamadiken, and I am Head of Platform and Marketing at Ajim Capital. And with me is Alex Schmid. He is the founder of Contro Health, a South African health tech startup that provides telehealth access to stigmatized healthcare. I hope I got the pronunciation correctly of your name.
You did indeed. You did indeed.
So yeah, let's just dive right into it. Tell me a little bit about yourself and what led you to starting Contro Health.
Cool, yeah. So my name's Alex Schmid, as you got the name right. I'm the founder and CEO of Contro. And Contro is a comprehensive telehealth platform that offers affordable, discrete, and convenient access to virtual consultations, on-demand pathology, and free medication delivery for stigmatized healthcare services within South Africa.
Awesome. But I also know that you have a background in law. You were working as a lawyer in the UK while you started your health tech startup. What made you transition from law to health tech, and why health tech?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think for me, I was always on the journey of becoming a lawyer. I went to university in the UK. Very fortunate and privileged to do so. Studied law, then did my master's in London, and then ended up getting a training contract with a firm called McFarlane's, where I trained and basically qualified and did M&A and private equity work. But between finishing my master's and going to my law firm, I had about 18 months off. And during that time, I went and worked for a startup in South Africa and helped co-found a sort of esports startup, which has got nothing to do with health tech, but I loved and really enjoyed the idea of just building a business and really getting into it and really building something from the ground up. And I think in a way I caught the startup bug. And when I sort of came to London and got into law, I loved it. Don't get me wrong. It was an amazing experience, worth every sort of second. And there was a lot of seconds, but it was really, really a great experience. But I had that itch that I wanted to come back home and really start something and start something that was going to make a difference. And really, in terms of health tech, it was the one area within South Africa that I found was ripe for disruption, I think is the first instance, but was also in the areas of stigmatized health, talking about sexual health, talking about mental health, leaning into a bit of skincare, but more on the sort of scheduled side. It was ripe for disruption because it was completely underserved. No one was really putting their brand name or doing anything for these specific services. There was general public health, clinics around sexual health, and there was one or two things, but there wasn't enough to really serve the market. And actually, the idea for Contro came to me from an ex-girlfriend, who I was in a long-distance relationship with during my time and during my studies. And she had just moved to Cape Town, and I was there during my holidays. And during that time, she went to the doctor to get a contraceptive pill or get a script for a contraceptive pill. Went through the rigmarole of phoning the doctor, driving to the doctor's office, waiting room with sick people, then seeing the doctor and getting a piece of paper just to be on a medication that she'd been on for 5-6 years. But during that consult, there was a bit of a question asked of her saying, why are you on the contraceptive pill? And surely it's time to start thinking about a family. Now, but a background to this, she was 25 years old. I was 19 when we started dating, so quite a big age gap. And I think this triggered her a bit, to be honest, and she got quite angry. Got the script, they went back to the pharmacy, and again, a similar public altercation took place where it was like, maybe it's time to start thinking about a family, but this was happening in public. Came back, told me the story, and my first thought was, why can't you do this online? Doesn't make any sense. And when she said she couldn't, I was like, well, there's a problem, and surely we can build a solution for this. And I started to really dig deep into sexual health in South Africa, understanding the market, understanding telehealth as a concept. And this was back in 2015. But I knew that I had to go finish my journey and become a lawyer. I'd worked really hard to get through university, to get this job. And it was sort of in my mind, let's just get this done, and maybe I'll come back to it. Roll around 2019. the itch just wasn't scratched, and I needed to go back and start. So I phoned my co-founders, who are still my co-founders today, and I said, guys, I've got this idea. Can we build it? And we built it. We moonlighted the whole time. We developed the platform over sort of a year, and we took all of our savings. I took all my savings and we put it into it. Roll around March 2020, on the 1st of March, I decided I'm going to quit my job as a lawyer and I'm going to start, and we're going to go full in on this Contro thing. Roll around March 17th and the world got locked down. There was the COVID pandemic kicked in. So we spent another 9 months in hibernation, really refining the product, getting the supplier contracts that actually have made the difference to Contro's success to date. And I finally was able to get on a plane, get home, solidify the business, get us very, very small team together. And we kicked off Contro. We bootstrapped it and we got it going on 1st June 2021.
Let's talk about finding your co-founder. How was that journey like for you? How did you know this was the right person you wanted to build this startup with?
In a way, it was a bit of luck. I mean, so my co-founders were friends of mine through video games. So they were both my co-founders are technical co-founders. I am not a technical co-founder. I'm more the business and legal side of things. But we were friends. And the way we started building Contro was really just a bunch of mates sitting in a room, coming up with an idea, trying to get this, right and correct and make sure that we got it. And we looked at the market and said, surely there's a way for disruption here. And the idea really, in a way, because we didn't have medical backgrounds, we took a very out of the box approach to what was the medical industry and how we could solve the solution. And I think coming from that outside sphere made the difference. Obviously, my uncle is a doctor. I've got lots of friends who are doctors, and we relied on a lot of advice on what we needed to do. And obviously, being a lawyer helps from a regulatory standpoint, so that was a big plus. But really having that non-medical co-founder in the beginning helped, because what we did is we said, well, how do we build this as a supply chain? How do we build this as a process, and then apply the medical knowledge to what Contro is going to basically deliver? And yeah, that's kind of how we got it going.
Awesome. And I watched one of your interviews where you talked about how you were bootstrapped from the beginning. Are you still bootstrapped? And if you're not, how are you navigating the funding climate?
Yeah, so the idea of bootstrapping, I think for me, there was always the Hollywood version of building a business where you go to dinner with some rich investor and you write your idea on a napkin and you say, cool, give me $10 million for this. I thought that was never going to happen, and it's not real. And two, I think the biggest thing for us is we didn't honestly have the confidence to know if we were going to pull this off. We just kind of thought, right, let's rather do it ourselves. Let's prove to ourselves that we can do it. And if we can prove to ourselves that we can do it and gain a bit of traction, then we can confidently go to investors and raise money. And I think that made a big difference when it came to our pre-seed round, where we raised $585,000 from various funders, which we only did probably 9 months after launch. So the goal was to get to 500 customers in the first year with very little budget. We did 750 customers in 6 months. And that was kind of the sort of go ahead to say, look, we've proven as much of the concept as we can with zero budget. We still had a bit of cash in the bank, but we knew that if we were going to turn this into a real business, we had to raise. And that's when we started approaching angels and small VC funds. And yeah, we were very lucky. We were fortunate to be able to get the traction early on to then you sort of back the fundraise that we sort of got done as well.
Yeah. And so since then, how have you navigated like funding climate? Because I know like funding right now, there's a like global economic crunch. And so how have you navigated that so far?
So we closed, so I'll be honest, so when we raised the round, it honestly took the first round took us almost a year. It was probably about 10 months. We raised in the first 6 months was tough. Even though we had the traction, it was still very tough to raise money in Africa. But we got to about 5 million rand, so probably about $300,000. Our goal was to get to $500,000, but we just couldn't get any more. Honestly, just couldn't get any more funding. But the day that we hit a year of 1 year old and we had a year of financials, then suddenly the VCs started coming in because they could input our metrics into the models and then, sort of say, all right, now you've got a bit of traction. We can measure this. We can, put some forecasts down. And that's really what kind of accelerated the remainder of the round. So we closed that round in end of October last year. We currently are fundraising at the moment. We're looking for about $1.5 million. And it's been tough. I'm going to be honest. It's been a really, really tough fundraise. We thought it would be, we were told that your first fundraise will be your hardest. I think nobody dialed. Yeah, it was, but nobody dialed in economic collapse into the second funding round. So we have been fortunate. We've been raising for 3 months at the moment. We have about $750,000 committed. Of the 1.5. So we're halfway there, and we're talking to a few VCs. But I think the difference with us is that when we built Contro, the idea was always to keep costs at a minimum. It was always about driving for profitability. And I think that sort of mindset has carried through into our investor presentations, and I think that's made the difference in getting what we've already got over the line.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned that you want to create a path towards profitability. I don't hear that every time. So this my next question is just going to be like off of this one, which is like, when do you think that Contro will hit profitability?
So we're 6 months away. We're 6 months away from break even in our current rate. So we're going pretty strong. We've also got a big B2B deal on the table that looks like it's going to kick off in February. We're just finalizing some stuff. And if we do that, if that kicks off, we're profitable straight away off that deal. So, I love the startup industry, but I also hate it in some ways. Every business has its needs and every business is different. So don't get me wrong on this. But I think a lot of businesses could probably get to profitability a lot quicker by just really watching their unit economics and watching their costs. I think a lot of startups get very excited and they're like, let's hire, let's build the team, let's build the culture, we're going for growth, and it's all about users. But I think that was 2021, 2022 approach, and it was unsustainable. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And it's never worked, to be honest with you. I think that's the irony of it. It literally has never worked. I mean, we look at sort of even the big US startups that have IPO'd, and they're not worth the valuations that they IPO'd at. They've come down. I mean, we've seen Uber's drop by 70%. Babylon Health, which is one of our big competitors in the UK, has been marked down 99% from its listing price. So when people are valuing these companies, I think the big thing with VCs, and I get it, VCs are coming in at a certain valuation and then they're looking to exit at a 10 times, 20 times valuation. That's the model. That's how VC works, right? That's how it works. And growth and revenue is driving those valuations, which is right. And you need that approach. But I think there has to be a clear path to profitability. Otherwise, you really are putting your money into a bit of a black hole.
Yeah, very true. And so I think that you have basically like hit it on the spot when you say that a lot of other startups just like they raise money and then they go after like, vanity metrics. You understand? And I think it's a really important topic that we need to talk about, especially like as Africans who are experiencing the funding crunch also. And so my next question to you would just be about, aside from funding, what has been your single biggest challenge with regards to building Contro?
So yeah, obviously funding is there. I mean, it's always going to be the biggest challenge, I think, in Africa. I think the second biggest challenge has been talent. finding strong talent in South Africa and Africa is extremely difficult. Coming from a London background, you can see the influx of African immigrants coming to London to work, and those are the best of the best coming in. And the problem is that they're leaving behind the economies in Africa, they're leaving behind the businesses in Africa, and you're not left with much when you're trying to build a team in Africa. And it's very hard to incentivize and keep talent when you've got this, possibility of people going overseas. So I think finding really good talent is probably the hardest challenge that we found. But it's key to building a very successful business. No one can build a business by themselves. You need a very, very strong team. And I think to be honest, that's been our toughest issue.
Yeah, and also your platform, your health tech startup, is supposed to prevent stigmatization. What strategies did you put in place to ensure that users feel comfortable when accessing healthcare through your platform?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that we made sure that nobody ever has to interact with anybody physically. I think that was the first step. I think the idea that you and me can have a call like this, it's a much safer space. And, if it's not going very well, you just click the button, end the call, and run away. So, I think, when we looked at telehealth, the biggest thing for us was that telehealth is a great concept. And actually, it's been around for a lot longer than we all think. Doctors have been calling patients over the phone since the early 1900s when it was invented. So telehealth has been around for ages. It's no new concept realistically, but the technology has been able to allow it to scale as a concept and be implemented. But when we looked at it, the one thing we started to realize was that what are the key benefits? Well, we can make it cheaper. We can make it more convenient, but the biggest thing is we can make it discreet. And that's where that discretion came in terms of the stigmatized healthcare services. So we knew, right, we have a model that ensures privacy, and we're treating areas of health that require privacy and help people get over the barrier of getting access to healthcare. So what we did was we said, right, how do we make this quick? How do we make this seamless? So we looked at telehealth generally, and the biggest problem with telehealth is that, and we spoke to other telehealth startups. This was a part of our research project. We started them, asked them what the problems were, what they were going through. And your general telehealth startups, I think the biggest issue was those that just did everything. So you could just book a consult, speak to a doctor. We found an average that 60% of patients that were going through general telehealth platforms were being referred to physical care, which basically means it's a waste of time for most patients. A lot of patients are coming through saying, hey, I've got a really sore leg, or I've got this really bad cough, and I've got, whatever it is. It's very hard to diagnose a patient when they're coming with symptoms and their symptoms are not very specific. If I told you I have constant headaches, there's multiple reasons why you could have. It could be dehydration, it could be eyesight, it could be a contraceptive pill causing it, i.e. another medication side effect. It could be light. I don't know. It could be a whole bunch of things. So what we said was, we don't want to be in a situation where we're sending patients away, because then no one's going to come back. So we said, let's streamline the process for specific issues within the stigmatized area of health that can be treated virtually. So, i.e. birth control is a fantastic example. Birth control is not something that it's not a treatment, technically. It's a prevention medication to stop, obviously, people getting pregnant. So it's not a need, it's a want. So I want to prevent pregnancy, therefore I want birth control. So we built a process to streamline the whole thing for individuals to get access to birth control by speaking to a doctor and then getting the medication delivered. We did the same thing with STIs, because STIs have very common symptoms. I don't want to go into detail on all of them because they're quite intense. But what we started to find with those as well is that the treatment regimes are pretty much the same. If you have a bacterial STI, you treat it with various courses of antibiotics. Doesn't matter if it's chlamydia, doesn't matter if it's gonorrhea, it's the same treatment package. And what we did is we streamlined all these regimes and then made it sort of a very seamless process. But the best part is the person can do it all from the comfort of their home. They literally do it from their phone and they don't ever have to see anyone. The only person they interact with is the delivery driver, and the delivery driver doesn't even know what he's delivering. So that's kind of how we've been able to ensure it's discreet.
And do you have plans of scaling out of South Africa, for instance, at some point?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the goal at the moment is to solidify our market share in South Africa, from both a B2C and a B2B perspective. But it's one thing I do see a lot of African startups doing is I think they expand too quickly. I see African startups they're in Kenya, Uganda, and then they're suddenly in Nigeria and Ghana, and I'm like, but you're 3 years old. Unless you have a SaaS platform, where you don't need staff on the ground or there's no operational capability, then sure, scale, go do as much as you can. But when you've got a physical component, or there's a payment issue, or there's an infrastructural demand for your business to operate, you really need to bed down your market first. So from my perspective, really bed it down, get to Series A, which is going to probably take us another year or two. Make sure we capture that market and then use that funding round to scale into your next jurisdiction. But only one, because I'm not going to go into 5 others because that's a nightmare. So again, just jump to one, solidify, make sure the market's running, and then again, rinse and repeat. But I think the goal is keep it slow.
Right. I think I like your ideology with regards to building a startup. And I think this is like one of the first times I'm hearing, someone speak as um, grounded as this. I think you're very grounded with regards to unit economics and just like knowing what works for your company and what you should work on per time, and not just like rushing into like a lot of things. And I think that's a very impressive thing. My next question to you will be that your company is basically a B2B2C, right? So what was like your growth plan right off the bat?
So the growth plan was, well, let's take you back to how we thought about the model. So as I mentioned with telehealth things, the biggest problem with telehealth services is also the expense. They are extremely expensive to run. Doctors are not cheap service providers. But we thought, okay, and really this is a symptom of us not having enough capital in the beginning. So we thought, right, we can't hire doctors because we can't afford them. We can't build a pharmacy because we can't afford it. So how do we run the process? Well, what we can do is we can build the tech that connects all of them. So we looked at the startup market, we looked at different models, and we said, right, the most successful model that we can find was Uber. Uber was a great model, very clever. It's the biggest taxi company that owns no taxis. It's unbelievable. Really, really clever concept. So we said, why don't we become the strongest healthcare company that doesn't hire doctors and doesn't own a pharmacy, but we connect them all together. So we took a digital aggregation approach to this, and which had scale in mind. So we always knew we can scale this by just bringing on, as you say, B2B partners and scale the business as we go and as we start to get more and more traction. So the best part is, and the way we've really built Contro is high operational leverage, low capital requirements. That's the internal motto. And that's kind of what we're looking to scale on and go from there. What we found from our perspective is B2C or B2B2C is there's 2 different ways of going about B2B2C. You can technically go B2B2C with B2B partners, and that's with our pharmacy partners and so on and so forth. Or there's technically what we are, which is B2B2B2C. In a way. And how that works is basically, so we've got our B2B partners and then we've got our B2B clients. So we're in the process where we're talking to an organization, I can't say much at all, but we're looking to offer our platform as a service to all of their, how can we call it? Employees, yeah, we can use that word. We'll use employees. And the organization now pays us as a platform, as a service, to allow their employees to access sexual health, mental health, and skincare services. And the best part is we get paid by the organization, not the employee. What we found with B2C is that customers are fickle. And at the same time, even though you can have the best service, and I truly believe we have an amazing service, you can go look at our Trustpilot reviews. That's definitely backed up by that. But with economic fluctuations, Africa is a very difficult place. Honestly, I don't think many people in Africa have a very stable income. I think it fluctuates month on month. And when it comes to chronic medications, it's difficult to maintain, cash flow for individuals to make sure they keep you in the medication on time. So if we can put it in the business's hands or the organizations that we're dealing with, then it's much more efficient to get individuals the medication that they need. So that's kind of the way we thought about it.
Awesome. I think I really like the fact that you said B2B to B2C. And it's actually because in my own experience also, I've worked in fintech and I've also done a couple of consulting for a number of startups. And what I see is that when it comes to B2B, the switching costs for an organization would consider it switching costs before it, terminates an agreement. But when it comes to a customer is always going to think about how much they're earning, how much they're saving, and all of that. But an organization would always think about a lot of other things, like how would their employees feel when this is cancelled? How long would their employees take to learn a new tech that they're onboarding, and things like that are very important in deciding what business model that company decides to go with when building their startup. And I think it's very interesting that you have also been able to navigate that. I think my last question will be about your version of the African dream. We don't always hear about African dream. We hear a lot about the American dream. We hear a lot about other dreams. So, what is your version of the African dream?
I think my version of the African dream is really, I think we need to get unified as a continent. I think the continent is completely split up. Even as a South African startup trying to raise funding from African VC funds, literally the quote I got the other day was, "You don't live in Africa, you live in Africa light." I was like, wow. Okay. And they were like, "You guys don't have the same problems that West Africa has, and East Africa doesn't have the same problems that South Africa has, and South Africa doesn't have the same problems that North Africa has." And
And that's why you're solving the problem that South Africa has, isn't it? Like,
but at the same time, we're also eventually going to be solving the same problem that West Africa has, and East Africa has, and North Africa has. Yep, absolutely. But I think where they're wrong and where they're right, I'll say this: where they're right is that the one thing about South Africa is that South Africa has existing infrastructure. So a lot of startups and companies like us build on top of existing infrastructure to disrupt the current market. A lot of African startups build the infrastructure. And I think that's where the difference comes in. South Africa has it has infrastructure, but it's failing infrastructure. Nigeria, East Africa, North Africa has some level of infrastructure, but not to the level of what a developed country has. So I think there's a bit of a difference in that. But I think Africa needs to look at what solutions are being used in all corners of Africa and say, how can we take this, invest in it, and help startups come into our markets? I think that's the biggest thing. So my technical African dream is, let's unite Africa. Let's use the solutions that are being sort of deployed in South, East, West, and North, start to apply them to our own markets. Because at the end of the day, we have to come together collectively. We look at Europe. I mean, maybe Brexit is the best example, but you've still got 27 nations working together as a collective, and the standard of living and everything is much higher than what is in Africa, where you've got a huge fragmentation, huge currency issues, huge payment issues from a cross-border perspective, logistics issues, etc. We need to come together if we're going to solve Africa's issues.
right. Thank you so much. I think this has been an amazing conversation so far. Thank you so much for coming on this podcast. And I really, really enjoyed the conversation. And I hope you did also.
I did. I mean, it's going extremely quickly. So thank you for your time and thanks for having me on.
Sure, sure. Thank you so much. And you can catch this podcast on everywhere you get your podcast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. When it's out, we'll definitely mention it on LinkedIn and social media platforms and all of that. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening. Enjoy the rest
Thank
of
you.
your day.
Cheers. Bye.